Good morning, my creative friends. This is Dr. Minette Riordan. This is Painting in Your PJs live with Minette. I cannot believe that I am coming up on a whole year of painting live here on YouTube with all of you, or drawing, or tangling, or journaling, or all the things that we've been up to over the past year. And I feel incredibly grateful for all the people that have joined me live, that have watched my replays, that have subscribed to me. So if that describes you, thank you, whether you have stopped in once or often. Super, super grateful to each and every one of you for being here. And November is always a time when we can come together in a more intense focus on gratitude. I believe in the benefits of a gratitude practice every day, but I like to go a little deeper this month, the month of Thanksgiving, of giving thanks, of just pausing for a moment to give a little more attention as we near the end of the year to the things that have been important to me in this past year. So I created, excuse me, a 2023 gratitude journal for you. It's completely free. The link is in the description of the video, and I'm also going to put it right smack into the comments for anyone that's here watching me live. And throughout the month of November, I am going to be working in an art journal. I've been really missing my art journal practice, and I'm going to be working in one of my favorite journals, which is a Hanamula sketch note diary. It's absolutely one of my favorite journals because it is lined on one side and blank on the other side, and it's actually absolutely perfect for this project. And I already had a blank one lying around, and it comes in a variety of different sizes. This is the really big one. I think it looks like it's about a 9 by 12. I really like the sort of 8 by 5 size is probably my favorite, but this one's really juicy as well. So I want to encourage you to download this list of gratitude prompts and create along with me this month, whether you simply write on the prompts that inspire you or you do like I do and dedicate some pages in an art journal to this creative practice. So welcome to Painting in Your PJs Live with Minette. If you're brand new here, please do hit the subscribe button, click that little bell to get notified when I go live. And I think that's all stopped up there. And this series is all about using art as a creative tool for personal growth and self-development. The more time I spend making art, the more healing I experience, the more joy that I experience, and the more that I can use art to get to know myself better, to uncover some of those unconscious limiting beliefs, those stories I've been telling myself, or to help me get clarity on decide what's next in my life. Again, I think that art as an expressive and therapeutic tool is incredibly powerful. So that's what this show is all about. And I think gratitude is a wonderful way to really explore what's important to ourselves and to come back together to reconnect with what's most important to us and why it's most important to us. So good morning. If you're joining me live, pop into the chat and say hello. Happy to be here with all of you. If you're catching the replay, type replay in the comments. Let me know that you stopped by to say hello. And I am gessoing my page before I dive in to do a little painting this morning. So this paper is not a nice thick mixed media paper, and it needs a little extra oomph. Good morning, Blanca. It needs a little weight and texture added to it, so I've added a coat of gesso so that can start drying. I downloaded the prompts, and the first prompt spoke to me today, and I encourage you to pick the prompts that speak to you on this journey. And I want to say extra thanks to Blanca because she's been with me all year long since the very beginning, Blanca. So thank you so much for sticking with me and so consistently showing up to join me live. I'm grateful for you, my friend. And that first prompt is, Hi, Judy. Good morning. What's one thing you're grateful for in your life today that brings you joy? What's one thing you're grateful for in your life today that brings you joy? And I thought that was such a great prompt. And when I'm working this way in my art journal, the more that I can make this a sacred practice, that I can bring a touch of ritual to it, then the more meaningful that practice becomes. And so here today, I've also taken a moment. I've already done some journaling. I have lit a candle, which I'm going to move out of the way here. And I also brought over just a couple of little things. Excuse me. Good morning, Brandy. I brought over a couple of little things, like just a little mini altar in my space as well. For you, that ritual, that sacred might look like, and I'm going to also move this out of the way so I don't get paint all over it. That ritual might look like saying a prayer or reading a poem like we did last month, or simply taking a few deep breaths and sitting with your art journal. I have all my Wizard of Oz stuff here floating around as well. There we go. Now we can get that up on the screen. And because I'm right in the middle of my Wizard of Oz mythical makeover, those themes are sort of top of mind. And the theme today over in the Wizard of Oz is home. And when I started to think more about the one thing I'm grateful for in my life today that brings me joy, it is definitely my home. So we moved in here May of 2022. Good morning, Anne. May of 2022. And not only have I fallen in love, like our home is great, and I have fallen in love with the place, with this state, with this beautiful environment and landscape that I absolutely adore. And so I wanted to create something kind of abstract that would represent home today. So I'm going to do some painting and maybe some mark making to just plant that seed of what is bringing me such deep joy right now and deep gratitude is this beautiful place that I get to call home. I'm going to try to remember to drink my cup of coffee I made myself with my nice espresso maker that my husband got me for my birthday last year. Try to remember to drink it while it's still hot. And I'm thinking about a palette, and I'm thinking about some landscapey colors. Right now we already have snow, the trees are off the leaves. The leaves are off the trees. Let me try that again. Let's use that one up. And so, it's kind of a little bit of a drab landscape, which is not normal here. And I'm going to start with something simple, and I'm going to start with colors that are all in the same color family so I don't create mud. And I'm feeling really drawn, I think, to this. Has become one of my new favorite colors, is this dark blue, Prussian blue. And we're going to want definitely some earth tones in here. And I'm going to start just by getting some colors down on the page. Inside the Wizard of Oz, today's lesson is this fun reductive painting, which I've done here before on the show. And I almost decided to do that this morning because I have so much fun with it. So I don't really know what I'm going to do. If you're new to my show and you've never watched me art journal before, this is how I roll, very intuitively. And with lots of coffee. All right. And I love my Catalyst wedge, so I think I'm going to start just by getting some color down that feels maybe a bit like some kind of an abstract landscape. And my gesso is probably still a little bit wet, and that's okay. Let's see if we can get some. This one's just about done. I've talked about these paints before. These are Nova Colors. It's a company out of Los Angeles. They're similar to golden fluid acrylics. They're actually made for muralists and people that paint outdoors, but they are great on canvas. They tend to be an affordable paint as well. All right, I'm not feeling that bright yellow. I'm going to get some of these earthy tones in here. And I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. I kind of have an idea in my head. Excuse me. And when I think about where I live, these are the colors of my landscape, right? So the dark of the mountains, the brilliant blue of the sky, these sort of olivey greens of the various pine trees. And I'm looking here for maybe one more green. And then we have a lot of gorgeous red rocks, and the soil can be very red, and the grasses can be quite gold. And let's just see what happens when we start to mix all these things together. I'm thinking what's going to happen is it's going to get a little bit muddy and a little bit interesting. And we're just going to work on this abstract landscape, moving these colors around the page. And I am loving this already. There's something magical that happens with the catalyst wedge that allows us to move, or any kind of scraper, move the paint across the page very differently than we can with a brush. When we're working with a brush, we can get into nooks and crannies, but things tend to blend more. Notice how I was able to, in some cases here, keep these colors pretty separate. So I'm going to go in and use up what's on the brush here. And I also recognize that I usually like to stick paper underneath to protect the pages underneath in the journal, and so I don't get my pages in my journal all stuck together. And then I can go right off the edge as well. And I'm just using up some of that paint that's here left on the wedge. And I'm looking at this going, it feels dark. It needs some brightness and some light. I'm already seeing like a little mountain shape here. I'm almost feeling like maybe I need some little bit more water down here. We have a lot of lakes. We're very close to the main river that comes down out of the mountains. But mostly, I'm just happy putting paint on the page. So part of working intuitively and working with a prompt. So yes, I have this vision of home as something that brings me joy, for sure. See how different that went on with the brush than it does with the scraper? So I'm going to actually come back and pull some of that paint off and move it around into some different places here. So the thing about working this way is that I'm working with the energy of joy. I'm working with the energy of home. I'm not trying to create a picture. I know where so many artists seem to get stuck is they get a picture in their head and they can't translate it to the page. And that is definitely one of the trickier parts of painting. And so I always encourage you to start with the abstract, to start with the underpainting and the color, to let the paint on the page really begin to speak to you rather than trying to dictate the direction or hold on to an idea and an image. What if you let the practice itself be your guide? Let the practice itself be your guide. And I am, like, it's really interesting. I'm sort of loving this this reminds me of the abstract emotional landscape class I teach, but I do it with watercolor, and I've never quite tried that same technique before just with paint, but I'm sort of liking the direction this is going. I find it very interesting. I'm loving this palette. It feels really luscious to me. I'm just filling in a few of these little white spaces. There's nothing wrong with that white space, but I'm feeling the need to just have these alternating colors in here. So the method to my madness is just play, deep play, being here with the colors, noticing how I'm feeling in my body. I'm feeling joyful. I'm leaning in to the palette here. And now I'm feeling, especially in the camera, it's not as dark in person as it is on the screen. The screen always makes the colors look a little bit darker, but what I'm feeling now is I need to brighten this all up, or maybe even paint over the whole thing. And a brayer would be perfect to get some white down over the top of this. And I'm wondering if all my brayers are on the other side of the studio. Nope, here's my little one that I love. This is such a fun size for art journaling. It came as part of a set of them I got pretty inexpensively on Amazon. And let's get some just good old titanium white here. I have so many tubes of paint right now that are definitely on their last legs. Let me get this out on the palette over here. All right, here we go. What happens if we just come in and start to add color and texture? And I'm just going to build up those layers of joy. And some of you may be thinking, oh my God, I can't believe she painted over that. I hear that all the time. And yet learning to let go is one of the most important things that we can learn in our lifetimes. And an art journal page is a perfect place to practice. It is a perfect place to practice. I am not attached in any way, shape, or form to outcomes here. I am not attached to what came before. If I get attached, I need even more to paint over it. Okay, now I have to think about where to go next. Almost feels like some collage elements on here would be fun. And sometimes these pages come together really quickly. Sometimes they take a long time to... Ouch, sorry, I got kitty claws in my lap. You're not supposed to stick your claws in me, dude. Are you coming up? Come on. All right, Diego, I know. Okay, now I get to try to paint with a fat cat in my lap, which is always an adventure. You can tell I've been painting a lot. So many of these tubes are on their last legs, which you know what that means. I get to go buy more paint. All right, bring in some of those brights back. It just feels like this layering process. And when I think about the land that we live on and some of the features of the land around here, of the giant red rocks and the red cliffs, you can see so many of those gorgeous layers. And something about adding that little bit of white under there just started to all of a sudden create depth, right? A little more depth, a little more visual interest. Maybe we're going to bring some of that red of those rocks back in. Feels like little magic starting to happen, but also just a little bit of mud, right? Like the brown and the blue, all of a sudden I've got that little bit of gray happening. and I want to bring in some gold and some greens. So I'm just going to clean off that brayer on my under paper here so I get something nice and clean. I'm not quite ready to dry it yet. This chromium oxide green is definitely a favorite green, and this is why I gessoed the page, because I knew I was going to add all of these different layers, and I wanted to make sure my page would stick together, not fall apart, would be able to handle the layers and the thickness of the paint. I think that's what I want to say. Okay, now it's feeling more like a landscape. I loved that first underlayer, and it's starting to feel even better like a landscape. And I want to decide where I want to go next. I'm almost thinking that I want to get it dry and maybe just come in with a posca marker and do a little drawing or sketching. It almost feels like it needs a little house in it, and maybe I want to pull some of the mountains out. I'm starting to feel like it needs a little bit of that, some bright pops of yellow for a little bit of light in here. I'm going to get some of this bright green back in the center. And one of the things that I have learned on my journey from both art journaling, but especially from painting on canvas, is to vary your tools. If you use the same tools all of the time, you don't know what kind of textures you can create. Like if you only paint with a brush, you don't know what kind of magic you can create. But when you combine a brush, a brayer, a scraper of some kind, suddenly you get different textures. Like I could even right now come in with that scraper and go over the thing and push all the paint back even one more time, which feels kind of interesting. So I'm just cleaning off my brayer here on my under paper. This is just a piece of white mixed media paper. Makes great under paper and will eventually get all painty and make great collage fodder. Especially in here, I'm wondering what could I do to maybe just shift that texture up a little bit. It's interesting, I can tell where, it's kind of dry. So some places it's like actually scraping, some places it's still really wet and it's kind of moving the paint a little bit. All right, now I need that moment to sit and kind of look at it, but it's kind of cool the way it is. And so I'm like, what does it need? And I'm almost feeling like, of course, I'm just coming off my Tree of Life in-person retreat this past weekend, which was magical. So I still have my painting, my Tree of Life painting sitting over on my big art table and some different images. And so I'm almost feeling like a tree would really represent many of the things I love about the area where I live, like one big, tall, lone pine, and maybe a little house over here, a little small house. It feels like it definitely, maybe even a collaged picture of a house, which I would have to go and find. Definitely feeling like I want to pull out the mountains and I need to decide where those mountains are going to be in the landscape here. So I'm going to grab a smaller brush. And And in the far, far distance, way up right outside of Rocky Mountain National Park, there's two peaks close together that stand up taller than everything else. Long's Peak, which is the highest peak in Rocky Mountain National Park, and the one that's next to it is Mount Meeker, and they dominate the landscape. And there's other smaller hills and mountains, and then there's the foothills that sort of all that you can see all the way. We live right on the edge of the foothills. They're gorgeous. But these two beauties really dominate the landscape. I love that I can walk out my front door and see all the mountains. And there's other mountains as well, but these two definitely, they're striking. They can't miss them. All right, so now it feels like it's coming together. We're starting to have, I want those two to be the tallest, so I'm going to pull that one a little smaller. So I've got my two mountains in there, and of course, right now those mountains are covered in snow. It's so interesting here in the summer when there's no snow on these huge, huge mountains, which is when people like to go and climb to the top of the mountains. Thank you, Blanca. So right now the mountains look beautiful with their layers of snow down their rocky faces. And Colorado has amazing clouds as well. So maybe we'll just bring a little bit of cloud magic into the sky, working very loosely. Look how far back I'm holding my brush, right? Like I'm not holding my brush tightly. And that blue paint underneath is still really wet, so this will probably, take a few different layers up here. Yesterday morning we had the most amazing sunrise. So much color in the sky. Another thing I love about living here is the skies are magnificent. All right, the clouds don't feel quite right, but everything needs to get nice and dry here for a minute. And I'm feeling like I want a body of water here in the front. And do I want that to be a river or maybe a lake? So these are things that are kind of far back in the distance. And I also maybe want to sort of just smooth some of this out a little bit and give more of that sense of the foothills. So I'm just using the color that's on the page, just moving that around a little bit. I'm trying to, it feels like that tree is going to go right up the side here of the piece. And I think we're just going to come in and give this sort of hint of a lake and some water right along the front edge of the mountains here. And again, today's prompt is, what's that one thing that brings you, that you're grateful for, that brings you joy? So for me right now, that thing is definitely this beautiful, magical place where I get to live. When I first started my journaling this morning, that certainly wasn't the only thing, right, that brings me joy. I'm like, well, how do I just pick? And so I thought about this past year and what has brought the most joy and the most solace. It's been all the amazing adventures that we have everywhere. I'm almost wondering if we can have a bit of a river flowing. I also think that because I've been able to bring people into my home for retreats, it's been, again, that magical opportunity, right, to live and enjoy this place a little bit more. And I want that to just be subtle, to just be maybe a hint of the water. Excuse me. And again, I'm not here to create a masterpiece. I'm not here to create something, it's going to hang on my wall. I'm here to enjoy the process and to create something that feels joyful to me and that will remind me when I flip back through this journal of that thing that brings me joy. All right, I'm going to hit this with the dryer, get it super, super dry, and then I'm going to bring in a tree. And it definitely needs a little house, but I think it's going to be a collaged house, and so I'll find that later because it might take me a while to find the right one. So let me get this dry here for a second. All right, it's dry-ish, right? There's a lot of layers on here, so I can see a few places where it's probably still a little bit damp, but we're just gonna go with it. And I'm gonna come in with that same burnt sienna and the raw sienna to create the trunk of my tree. So I'm sticking with the same palette that's already here. And the trunks of a lot of the pines here are pretty red, a little bit brown. So I'm going to add just a touch of blue to that and maybe just brown it up a little bit. And I'm going to use my palette knife to lay in the bark of that tree. And I'll come back with a brush but this using the palette knife is going to give us a good texture for the trunk. I got a little blue up there. Using the palette knife to layer paint again is great for just creating texture. The trunks here have so much texture in the wood. It's funny, it's so wet, it's all of a sudden it's super, super glary in the light. And this is going to need some white on it, but it's going to have to get super dry before I add any other color to it. Just make sure we get the shape of that. And I'm going to come up here and start to add some of the branches in. I may end up painting over that mountain. We may not be able to even see Long's Peak by the time we're done. It's all good, right? That's about the layers and the journey. And many of the trees here have very tall trunks. And because they're often in a forest, we don't see the greenery till way up in the tops of the trunks. So this definitely needs some white and maybe some more of that nice bright raw sienna in there as well. It's too wet to add the highlights. Okay, so time to dry again. So having a handy dandy hair dryer or a craft dryer, this is an old embossing dryer from Paper Source, makes the painting process go a lot faster so that you're not always waiting for paint to dry. Okay, dry-ish. Let's get some of our greens going here. The pines here are definitely a gorgeous sort of gray green. And we're going to see how I do it just creating some abstract branches. And I've got this fan brush sitting here, so I wonder if we can play with this fan brush. Get a little of that blue in there as well. And just come in and start to layer in some color. Remember, I'm going for the feeling of a tree, not the realism of a tree. Again, using a variety of different tools. And I did lose my mountain in there, but that's okay. I can still see some of those branches in there, which is great. And a very, very simple tree. That fan brush worked great to create a little bit of a textured tree. And maybe we're going to come in with some grasses over here. Build up our landscape a little bit. But not too much. I still want to see that soil underneath. And I'm almost tempted to move my other mountain back over here so I can see it again. I know it's underneath there. Let's see if we still got a little bit of, just a little bit of white in here to just brighten this up just a tad, up at the top where the light is shining. A little bit of light on the water there. And other than putting, a house on here, this feels pretty good. Like this is the landscape that brings me joy, but it does need that other mountain there. So I'm gonna add back in one more mountain over on this side over here. And then eventually I think it's gonna probably get a house added. Once it's really dry, I want to come back in and work on maybe giving the little more texture. brush still has water in it. You can tell by how opaque that paint is when I'm working with acrylics. I like working with a really dry brush. Maybe bring this one a little more into the foreground there. And once it's dry, it needs a little snow on the top. But I feel like I'm at a good place to pause and stop. It needs to get air dry now. You can only dry so much. If I try to use the dryer too much on this, what will happen is that the paint will start to bubble. It makes the page a little bit fragile. I'm trying to put my paint away and it's all falling on the floor. All right, so I wanted to just lift that up and show. So it's not 100% complete, but it definitely feels like it's at that place where it needs to rest and I need to maybe just sit with it. But what I love about this practice of painting with gratitude is this just being with what is, being with what brings me joy. Like I started with this thing that brings me joy is home. And so what I painted was the landscape of the place I call home, and landscape is so important to me. So thank you, as always, for joining me live. If you're watching the replay, let me know you stopped by. Click that like button to let me know if you enjoyed what I shared today. And the link is in the comments as well as in the description of the video to go and download your copy of our 2023 gratitude journal and do some art journaling along with me all year. So this is my last formal live until next Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. And I'll probably pop in over the weekend with a couple of more lives. I'm committed to doing this practice at least 3 times a week, and I may not always get to go live. It's going to be a busy month. It's a holiday month for all of us, but I will be back with more art journal prompts focused on gratitude. Have a beautiful rest of your day, my friends. I'm so grateful for you. Right back, Blanca. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.